Hello, everyone, and welcome to the session, WorkSafe's Approach to Risk-Based Inspections. This session is kindly sponsored by our conference health and safety sponsor, WorkSafeBC, represented today by Kim Stubbs. My name is Melissa Lamb, and I'm the Administrative Assistant at Actsafe Safety Association. Before we start this session, I would like to first acknowledge the traditional Indigenous lands that we all live and gather on today. Although this meeting is online, we each still enjoy the pleasure of living within an Indigenous territory. To highlight the importance of this acknowledgement, I would like to urge you, following this session, to visit the Native Land digital website and search the territory on which you are located. That website is www.native-land.ca. If you have questions for Paul and Jody, please use the Q&A function, which you should see in the top right corner of the screen next to the chat, participant, and closed captioning buttons. Kim and I will keep an eye on the questions and will pose them to Paul and Jody at the appropriate time. If you see a question that you would like, you can also vote to move it up on the list. Without further delay, let me welcome Kim Stubbs from WorkSafeBC to introduce our speakers.
Good morning, everyone. It's definitely a tough position to be in when you're behind Eric Stewart. So anyway, you ready for an hour of fun-filled session on law and policy? I'd like to introduce our next speakers. So we've got Paul Bergen, who is an occupational safety officer who's worked at WorkSafeBC for 14 years, and he's had 5 years on the film team. I'd also like to introduce Jyoti Minhas, who has over 10 years experience in health and safety, has worked at WorkSafeBC for 2 years, and has been on our film team for 1 year. So now I'd like to introduce our two speakers to come on and present their topic. Thank you, everyone.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Paul Bergen. I am the lead officer on the film team, and I'd like to start by acknowledging that I am presenting to you from the Katsi, Kwantlen, and Semiahmoo First Nations territories. Before we start, and I'll let Jyoti introduce herself, just kind of a quick overview on this presentation. Today, a lot of the information is going to be motion picture and television, and that's because for the last 2 years, performing arts, sorry about that, performing arts has really not done a lot. So going forward, a lot of the information, especially around risk-based inspections, will be part of the inspection process for the performing arts industry. I am the lead officer for that as well. So without further ado, I'm going to let Jyoti introduce herself. Thank you.
Hello and good morning, everyone. My name is Jyoti Minhas, and it is a pleasure to be here presenting to you all today. And I also wanted to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Katsi, Semiahmoo, and Kwantlen nations that I reside on and will be presenting from. So we can get started here.
So to start, we're going to kind of talk about WorkSafeBC. And a lot of the officers, when we're doing our inspections, especially in the film and the performing arts industries, we find a lot of people don't really understand who WorkSafeBC is, what we do. So Jyoti is going to spend some time going through a little bit of history. Once we finish that, we're going to look at industry statistics. These are based over a four-year period or 5-year period, and we're going to see some interesting numbers, specifically around injuries and the types of injuries we're seeing. We're going to have a look at what has happened last year in regards to the Motion Picture and Television Production Initiative, things that were identified. We're going to go forward, look at what's happening for 2022. And this is where we're going to be looking at the risk-based inspections. Jyoti and I are going to basically do a case study on what officers are seeing and how employers, supervisors, and workers can identify certain risks, certain hazards, and how to mitigate those hazards and put control measures in place. We're going to do a summary, basically, of the whole 45 minutes. And the reason I say 40 is what we find with WorkSafe, and I'm just, when I look up to the right, it means that's where the screen is. I see we have 48 participants. We find that WorkSafe officers get a lot of questions. So we have allotted a significant amount of time for questions from the audience, and Jyoti and I will obviously do our best to answer those. If we are unable to answer them, we are going to then come, we have asked the facilitator to forward those questions to myself and Jyoti, and we will respond, as long as they're not anonymous, obviously. If you do have a name to it, then we can respond. Okay, I will now pass this over to Jyoti.
So over the next few slides, I will review the role and authority of WorkSafeBC and hopefully be able to provide you all with some more insight into what it is that we do. Next slide, please. So our mandate, we are committed to creating a province free from workplace injury or illness and to providing quality service driven by our core values of integrity, accountability, and innovation. By partnering with workers and employers, we help British Columbians come home from work safe every day. Next slide. And this is our vision. So WorkSafeBC's vision is to keep British Columbians free from workplace injury, disease, and death. So just a little bit of history here. At the dawn of the 20th century in British Columbia, industries such as mining, fishing, logging, and agriculture powered the local economy. It was a time of growth and opportunity for many, but for workers, it was also a time of great risk. That risk led to labor unrest and ultimately the birth of the Workmen's Compensation Board of British Columbia. Prior to WorkSafeBC, workers didn't have a lot of recourse if they were injured on the job, except for maybe trying to sue the employer. So the Workers' Compensation Act provides workers with rights and coverage for workplace injuries, but have given up the right to suing the employer. Next slide, please.
Just a comment, I don't know if anyone noticed, it says Workmen's Compensation Board. I'm going to verify this, but I believe it wasn't until 1974 it became the Workers' Compensation Board.
I think so, around there, yeah.
Yeah. So it took a while to actually get a little bit more up to date. Okay.
So we are a provincial agency that is dedicated to providing safe and healthy workplaces all across BC. And we have 16 service delivery locations throughout the province. About half of them are split between the Lower Mainland here and between Vancouver Island. And then the remainder of the locations are spread out throughout the rest of the province. So we are up as far north as Terrace and Fort St. John, and then we are down south to Cranbrook and to Nelson there. Next slide, please. So there are three main divisions at WorkSafeBC, and that includes claims, assessments, and prevention field services. And just for context, WorkSafeBC has over 3,500 employees. Next slide. So claims is responsible for the adjudication of workplace injuries and illnesses that are reported to WorkSafeBC. They provide wage loss, medical treatment, prescription costs, rehabilitation, and return to work programs. Claims is the largest department with WorkSafeBC, and it accounts for about 95% of the annual budget. Next slide. WorkSafeBC is 100% funded by the employers of BC, plus the investments. So assessments determines employers' classification and base rates, the premiums, and collects the money based on those rates. They also collect the money from penalties and citations that are issued to the employers.
And just a comment to the group here. Now, I know I've looked at the participants, there's a lot of different people out there. The base rate is based on the entire industry. So how much a production or a performing arts pays is based on the amount of injuries the entire industry is being exposed to. And then each individual employer can either go good or bad. And I'll use ICBC. If you're a good driver, you get a lower rate. If you're a bad driver, you get a higher rate. And it's the same in this industry too. And this is what assessments does is they look at the amount of injuries a production will get or performing arts will get, and they'll base how much their premiums are going to be on those injuries. So if you're a good employer, lots of safe work days, your premiums will be going down.
Mm-hmm. So prevention field services includes prevention officers, OHS investigations, OHS practices and engineering, as well as consultation and education services. There are approximately 341 prevention officers in British Columbia. And of those, we have about 258 occupational safety officers, 65 occupational hygiene officers, and about 19 supervisors. Next slide, please. So as occupational safety officers, we look at the prevention of incidents that could hurt you today. So common ones such as slips, trips, and falls, working with power tools, using mobile equipment, which could potentially result in struck by injuries, any sort of musculoskeletal injuries that could lead to something happening, and any sort of other equipment that's being used, and cutting of hands, amputations, things like that. Next slide, please.
And I just want to apologize. I can't control that thing coming up in the corner of this presentation. It's part of our WorkSafe system. So if you see it come up, I'll get rid of it right away. Someone's trying to get a hold of me.
So occupational hygiene officers look at incidents that could hurt you tomorrow, such as asbestos-related work and exposure to silica dust. So 53% of all fatalities in 2021 were related to occupational disease. So we are finding that people who were exposed to asbestos, silica dust 10, 20, 30 years ago, those are the ones that they're being affected now, essentially. Next slide, please. So our top priority is prevention because virtually all workplace injuries are preventable. We work to prevent injuries through education and awareness building, consultation, and enforcement of the Occupational Health and Safety Regulation and the Workers' Compensation Act. So I will now pass it over to Paul to review some statistics with you.
Thank you very much. And bear with me, I've got 3 screens going here, folks, so kind of looking around. So yeah, we're going to look at some statistics. These are 2016 to 2020. There are going to be some interesting numbers for you. Again, when we look at the industry itself, we haven't correlated the last 2 years. COVID's been obviously an interesting problem. But again, so when we look at the industry itself, so again, this is motion picture and television. It's not performing arts. Performing arts has a little bit of a different rate. But when we look at the injury rate, when we first came up with the motion picture industry initiative at the beginning of 2020, we took these numbers, and the injury rate for the province, so we're talking the province, was 2.2. What does that mean? That means 2.2 per 100 workers was reporting to WorkSafeBC an injury. When we look at this, especially the motion picture industry, it was 2.6. So it was 18% higher than the industry, than the BC provincial average. When we look at a little bit kind of a worse number is the serious injury, which means when we talk serious, it can be fractures, fatalities, so on. But it also, for time, like the amount of time someone is going to be hurt and off the job. The province was 0.29. So again, 0.29 workers out of 100 was receiving a serious injury. Motion picture was 0.45, so 55% higher than the provincial average. And when we talk, we're across the board on this. We're like, it's everything from an office to forestry. And the one thing I mentioned to a lot of performing productions is you kind of do everything. You do construction, you do greens, you do warehousing, you do everything. So again, your industry averages are higher than the provincial average. So where are these incidents happening? Falls. It's the biggest one. Falls in this industry account for approximately 30%. Bear with me, I got this. 30% of the, I think I know what's going on. Okay, sorry about that. 30% of the injuries in the industry is from falls. The number one, falls from stairs or steps. So going down stairs, going down steps. Number two is falls from ladders. Interesting one, falls from non-moving vehicles is number three. I know you probably can't see this slide very well. We have provided the presentation to Actsafe so they can share it. Number four, falls onto or against objects. So tripping and hitting something, hitting their head on something. Basically, the fifth one is falls to floor, walkway, or other. So that could be basically tripping over a cable cover. And then the last one, jump step to a lower level. I've seen this quite, I haven't seen the injuries, but I see what happens, especially when we're at a circus and they've got the power tailgates halfway up and people are jumping down and then jumping off another one. No, that wasn't my wife calling me. She's upstairs. So, bear with me. So what kind of injuries are we looking at from these falls? Sprains, strains, and tears are number one. Okay, so we're getting a lot of musculoskeletal type of injuries. Number two is concerning, it's fractures. We're getting a lot of broken bones. Number three, bruises and contusions, like, again, banging your head, or I should say banging your shoulder, banging your wrist, banging your elbow, bruises, contusions. Number four is concerning, though, concussions. Seeing a lot of concussions in this industry from slips, trips, and falls. I know that the stunt industry, it's a concern with the stunt industry, and again, these numbers kind of show it. There are concussions happening out there. I've also seen concussions, though, called out to an incident where a camera ran into the back of a worker's head when they were following behind. So again, the graph is quite small. Falls. What's getting hurt? Number one, ankle, toes, and feet. And we're going to talk about that because a lot of the officers at WorkSafe have seen a very consistent problem with the industry. Ankle, toes, and feet. Backs. Obviously, people fall down, hurt their back. Wrists, fingers, and hands. You're falling down, you put your hand out to stop your fall. Knees. They all make sense. The last one, though, is other. The fifth highest one is other. And what is other? It's a combination. What we're looking at is several injuries combined. Okay. And from here. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at what happened in 2021. So as I've stated, slips, trips, and falls make up 26% of the accidents in the motion picture industry. And that's from 2016 to 2020. We're still correlating the last couple of years, or last year specifically. It accounts for 30% of the time loss claims the industry is experiencing, and 32% of the lost time days. That's a signal. That's 30. That's 1 in 3. 1 in 3 injuries is basically a slip, trip, or fall, and it's 1 in 3 of the reasons that workers are not coming to work due to these injuries. What officers have seen is work planning and overlapping work activities are critical considerations for worker safety. It's not uncommon, obviously, in the industry that we're going to see overhead work being conducted by workers underneath. We see a very congested, that's the next one, congested and work pace are important factors, very congested areas where work is taking place. We see, again, very long days, okay, a lot of time constraints in this industry. And again, the performing arts is the same thing. I've done inspections of performing arts. They have only so much time to get a set in place, whether it's, with the rigging and everything. So again, pace is a definite issue, people running and tripping. The motion picture risk problem focus areas for 21 to 23 is going to be falls. It's going to be because it's such a serious driver of the injury rate, and hence it's worthy risk to focus on. So that's what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be asking when we go on to these inspections, we are going to be looking at how the employer is mitigating risk when it comes to slips, trips, and falls, as well as everything else. But this being such a big part of the industry's injuries, it will be our main focus. So what I've got here is what are WorkSafeBC officers seeing from last year. This is 2021. This is our numbers. We did 129 initiating inspections. What that means is we did one show could get 3 initiating inspections. So we could have, and I'll use performing arts too. There's multiple parts to any kind of production. There's the prep, the setup. There's the actual show itself, where there's a whole different, again, excuse the pun, cast of characters. And then there's the breakdown or the striking. So we may, or officers will come to all 3 components of a show. Then there's locations. If in the film industry, you could be, at the studio today, tomorrow you're going to be over at, let's say, Central Park in Burnaby. So those are very different areas, very different workplaces. Simple enough on that. Number of orders issued, 187. So 187 out of 129 inspections. That's significant. What we've done here is we've broken down the top. There's a lot of orders, but the top 5. Remember what we said about foot or ankles, feet, and toes being the number 1 injured part of the body? Number 1 order issued on this industry is improper footwear. Officers are still seeing it. It is a problem. I'm not going to go into all the reasons workers have told me they're not wearing proper footwear, but needless to say, the best one is I'm exempt. What does that mean? Exempt from getting hurt, exempt from wearing the proper footwear. So number 1 is for first aid procedures. I'll kind of explore that a bit. First aid procedures. So we have 2 different sets here. We have a studio, we have a location. They have very different first aid procedures. When we go to a location, we find the first aid procedures are usually not very good, and also
non-existent.
Or non-existent.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Or non-existent. They're not posted. And because the industry, especially motion picture and television, you have your construction first aid, and then you have your crafty first aid. I have been called to a serious incident, and other officers have experienced this, where there's been actually confusion on set because you've got construction happening over in Studio A, you have production in Studio B, someone gets hurt in Studio B, and someone calls the Studio A construction. Now, it's great, somebody showed up, but again, not very clear on who should be showing up. So because of the differences in your first aid, we're seeing very poor first aid procedures. It's getting better. I just want to make a comment here before we go any further. In the 4 to 5 years I've been doing this, I have seen some major improvements, but it's still the number 2 order. These are the first 2 orders that we're issuing. Propane tanks. We love our propane tanks. If they're empty, store them, strap them up. Where we see the biggest concerns as officers is, especially during the winter, is when we come up to they're heating a tent. And this could be, again, performing arts, it could be anywhere. You're heating something and using propane heaters. Those tanks have a regulator attached to them. Someone knocks the tank over. That regulator gets damaged. People don't think much about it. They stand the tank back up. Hey, the propane heater's still working, no problems. They don't know that it's been that the regulator's been cracked and it's leaking. Propane is like water. For those of you who don't know how it works, it's like water. It falls to the ground, it follows a path. Some of you in the industry may remember the explosion that was up at Golden Ears Park, where a tank did get damaged and that propane did leak and it did ignite. Fortunately, no one was hurt. Number 4 is footwear assessment. And this was an attempt. We issued this order many times on employers to give them the opportunity, because again, you're the experts. I walk onto a set and I see someone carrying a desk and running shoes. I'm going to say, wow, if you drop that, you're going to hurt yourself. Mm-hmm. So we allowed the industry the opportunity to basically look at their different departments and make a decision on doing an assessment, talking to the heads of departments, making sure they understood. We gave them a list, a checklist, you know, are you exposed to this? Are you exposed to that? What was disappointing, and I'm going to be honest here, disappointing, some of these assessments actually said carrying a 40-pound piece of equipment was not hazardous to my feet, so safety footwear was not required.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's like, I would challenge anyone to drop a 40-pound item on their foot and tell me it doesn't hurt. But yeah, they complied the order, they did the assessment, but they ended up getting the first order 822.1 because, again, we would walk on set, the officers would identify workers carrying heavy equipment, and you get the order, you get a new order. The last one is, again, something the industry struggles with. We've had many conversations. Actsafe has an excellent new young worker orientation that must be used. You can use ours. I don't care. It's a requirement under the regulations. 323.2 must be documented. Where the industry does great is with workers that start on day one. Where the industry is struggling is what they call performance. Whatever it is, that's where they're here for 1 day, 2 days, and then they're gone. It is an important document. It is a legal document, and I'm just going to give you a scenario that I witnessed. I was at the location. It was on a wharf. There was a 5-foot drop to the water, and the employer failed to tell anyone not to go over to the edge. Like, that is a hazard. You know, they did not tell anyone that was new to the, like, everyone that would work there, that had been there, knew about it. But there was several background performers, quite a few actually. And after the inspection, the employer took excellent steps. They barricaded off, but it was not documented. If a worker had fallen off that wharf into the water, WorkSafe would have become a say, you know, how long does this person work for you? 1 day. Oh, okay. Show us at WorkSafe their new and young worker orientation. Show us that you told that worker not to go over to the side of that wharf. Oh, you don't have anything? So we've been working with background. And again, when we go out on inspections, officers love to educate and consult with all the different departments. Background, I've had many conversations with about how this can be done. So again, if there's any more information on this, I'd be more than happy to share it with offline, obviously, and we can go over this new young worker. But new young workers are always getting hurt, you know, and unfortunately, I'd say a lot of the times, I'm not going to say 90%, but a lot of times, it's because they were not provided all the hazards that they may be exposed to as a requirement, as a requirement of the employer's due diligence. Okay. We shall carry on. So, just looking at my time here, we're doing good here. So what I'm going to do is we're going to pass, I think it's just a basic, sorry, I'm just doing my technical difficulties here. Okay. So, as we go into 2022, we're going to be looking at 4 very basic parts of a requirement for a good risk management system. One is understanding the risks. One is implementing measures to control those risks. One is communicating to your workers. And 4 is monitoring and updating. Very simple stuff, but it can make a huge difference in a workplace safety system. So let's talk about, and I'm going to use some anecdotal stuff going on here. We're also going to do a case study. Jody and I are going to do a case study together. So understanding the risks, simple enough. Identify the hazards. Begin by accurately identifying hazards in your workplace. A hazard is anything that can cause harm, such as chemicals, electricity, or equipment. Standard. Nothing unusual there. Risk. Risks After you determine the hazards exist in your workplace, assess the risks these hazards pose to workers so you can dedicate the appropriate attention and level of control to each one. The risk is the chance that somebody could be harmed by these hazards, as well as the potential severity of the harm. So I'm going to give you an anecdotal thing here, something to really simply think about. You have to cross the road. What's the hazard? You can get hit by a car. Pretty straightforward. Mm-hmm. Risk. The difference between crossing Georgia Street jaywalking downtown Vancouver at 5 p.m. and a rural country road at 3 a.m. in, let's say, Cloverdale. The hazard's the same. You get hit by a car, but the risks are exponentially higher, obviously, with the downtown situation. So let's do a scenario here. Let's do a bit of a case study here. So WorkSafe officer comes on site. What they see is a wall that has been built. It is approximately 20 feet long by 15 feet high. Workers are required to paint the wall. What you identify is workers are using ladders. So what's the hazard? Falling from ladders. We already identified as the number two reason, I should say, why people are falling. So obviously there's a hazard here. The ladders are 8 feet in height and the wall is 15 feet high. What's the risk? Now we have got workers using equipment that may not be appropriate for the job, and they are obviously carrying paint up those ladders to an 8 foot. And yes, folks, I have seen people standing on the top steps of ladders painting, and electrical, not picking on painters here, and other jobs in the industry. So again, risk, hazard. What I'll do is I'm going to pass it over to Jyoti now to talk about implementing measures.
So the next step is to control the risks. The greatest risk should be addressed first. If you cannot eliminate a risk, you'll need to implement control measures to minimize it. So this example that Paul is talking about of using a ladder to paint a 15-foot wall. So how can we eliminate the risk? We could not use a ladder and maybe use a scissor lift instead, something a little bit safer and more secured. Because what happens when you're on a ladder that's a lot taller than where you are, you're going to be standing on the top of the ladder potentially, and you might be reaching a lot, is what we see with people working on ladders. You know, you think, oh, it's only a couple of inches, I can reach that far. And then you reach too far and you fall off the ladder. So how can we just get rid of using the ladder if it's not appropriate for that particular job and it can't be safely? Putting in something else, just a different type of equipment that is a lot safer, even a scaffold or anything like that. Even with the ladders, they are just the more unsafe one to use, but the appropriate ladder for the job then, right? If it's a smaller job, whatever it is. So the biggest thing is to just try and implement the proper control measures to minimize that risk of falling.
Just to kind of step in here too, a lot of WorkSafeBC officers, it's not as bad as it used to be, have written a lot of, that we don't write the ladders out of order. Not stop use on them. Really, but we've seen a lot of, these ladders have paid for themselves, and I've seen people using duct tape to hold these ladders together. So you're using a piece of equipment that's not just incorrect, but you're also using a piece of equipment that you've repaired. Yes. And you are up. Some of the most serious injuries I've been called to in this industry have been falls from ladders. So, and a lot of it has to do with not maintaining 3-point contact and not using the ladder or not using the proper piece of equipment for the job.
Yep.
Thanks, Jyoti. I'll pass. So it's on to me. So communication. So bear with me. Okay. So management basic communicate. The risk management program won't affect if no one knows about it. Ideas to get started. Provide managers, supervisors, and workers with orientation or training on how to identify hazards and what to do to control the risks. I don't have a problem with this. When I talk to workers, supervisor, heads of departments, they know exactly. A good example is stunts. I've talked to a number of stunt coordinators now, stunt riggers. They know the hazards. They know the risks. They have all the controls in place. So they know it. But then why do things go sideways? Document and share your safe work procedures and policies with the workers. Again, documentation is it's work, right? I find the industry does do a lot of documentation. Sometimes it's just not it's not good enough. I guess that's the best way. It does in some cases it doesn't even meet the minimum requirements of what's required under the regulation. I'll use the employer incident investigation report, and I'm going to pick on slip, trips, and falls and footwear. We see a lot of slips, trips, and falls, and I review a lot of EIIRs. And what I see in a lot of them is they blame everything, but I don't see anywhere in there it talks about what kind of footwear the worker was wearing at the time that they slipped. And when I delve deeper into it, I find the footwear was not appropriate. They were on a side, here's a good example, they were on a side of a hill, it was snowy out, and they're wearing running shoes. That's safety footwear just isn't steel toe boots. It's appropriate footwear for the task that's being performed. Good grip, hiking shoes on the side of a slippery slope is probably the best. Actually, the best thing to do is not even be there. But again, if you need to be there, how can you control it? Okay. And again, this documentation, EIRs being shared with the joint committees and stuff is definitely something that needs to be reviewed. Look at the footwear before we determine that, there was, again, it's just not because it was slippery out. Jyoti?
So monitoring the risk. Managing your workplace risk is an ongoing process and not kind of a one and done. You'll need to monitor the effectiveness of the control measures in place and improve those that are not working as intended. So one way to kind of monitor the risk is review the first aid records. Have a look. Has falls or whatever it is that we were talking about, has it decreased once you've implemented these control measures? Is the Joint Health and Safety Committee aware, and are they reviewing and monitoring? You can get them to help and assist, and they can review and see if there's been an increase or a decrease in incidents as well. And then you can also just have a discussion with the heads of department and have a regular chat with them and just see if there's been a change. If there hasn't, then we need to go back to the controls and try something else, try something different if it's not working.
Before we go on, there is a question in the chat, and I know chat's not supposed to be where the question is, but there is a comment in there, and I'd like to I'm going to actually cover this. But what is the working relationship with production safety reps and so on? I'm going to actually talk about that in just a few minutes, so you can get an idea of where we're at. Just to make a simple set, I get phone calls now with questions. I get emails with questions. They're not afraid to give us a call. This was something that we took a lot of time. But no, we are not the big hard hat with the big blue book there to beat you over the head. We don't want people hurt on the job, so we will do whatever is necessary to make sure that workers are protected. Mm-hmm. So we're going to kind of summarize what's going on for 2021 and 2022 here. Bear with me. So, summary, risk management basics. At WorkSafe, we love our acronyms. Just going to give you a heads up. We actually do have a guide on acronyms. The RMB approach will provide awareness and visibility and measurable outcomes. When officers are on set on a performing arts, I'm hoping some of our performing arts people can come up. I'm looking forward to working. I notice a few people in the audience that I recognize. I'm looking forward to, again, working with you, conducting those inspections, identifying the hazards. We're going to talk to workers, okay? That's something officers do. We don't just talk with the employer. It's not uncommon for myself. I'll just talk to myself now. I will talk to about 20 different workers on an inspection. I will talk to try to go to every department, wardrobe, construction, paint, production, camera, doesn't matter, background. I talk to everyone. I find out what's going on. I hear the successes. I hear the concerns. I hear the successes. COVID. I got to be careful how I comment on this. Over the last 2 years, sorry about that. Over the last 2 years, COVID-19, I've seen incredible work done to protect people from the virus, to the point that they've actually put surgical masks on people that are spraying toxic chemicals. C-19 was a success. Let's be straight here. C-19 safety plans were a success. They did control the COVID in the film industry. It was amazing stuff, testing, physical distancing to the limit that it could be done. We had workers without masks that had to work close, obviously our casts. When the performing arts comes up, obviously it's going to be the same thing. You got people, you can't obviously do a play with a mask on. So COVID was successful. It was successful in how it was done. It was successful in how it was controlled. It was a little, like I said, a little over controlled at times. Let's take that knowledge, let's take that experience, what we learned for the last 2 years, and put it into health and safety. Like I can tell I'm very passionate about this, because I used to go on a set. There'd be an army of people protecting you from COVID. Let's get that army going into protecting you from getting hurt on the job, identifying, hey, you're not wearing the proper footwear. Hey, you've got the wrong equipment. So let's take the successes of COVID and put it into health and safety. Let's get that injury rate down, because again, there is no need for it. And again, employers, like last, all sizes and safety management systems. It doesn't matter how sophisticated you are, whether you're a multi-million-dollar feature film to a MOW. It doesn't matter where you are. These are really simple things to do. You see a worker using a 8-foot ladder to paint a 15-foot wall. Hey, stop. Let's think about this and let's do better. And let's be straight here, people. It's the heads of the departments that should be the most safety conscious person at times, because it's their people that are overseeing. And we can go into the regulations in the Act and what supervisor responsibilities are, but workers need to sometimes be guided, because again, we're rushing to get that wall painted. The summary, again, the motion picture and television production officer team. Sorry, there we go. So we have a manager of interest. Her name is Gerald Merriweather. A lot of you may know who she is. She's been the manager of interest for the film team that's our kind of our pet name for it at WorkSafe, the film team, for several years now. We have a supervisor, Daniel Farley. Some of you again will know his name. He's been doing a lot of work with the rental companies lately due to a certain electrical issue that was identified. And we have a lead officer, and I'm the lead officer, Paul. The reason they call me lead is because I'm 100% motion picture performing arts. I am the only officer that's 100%. I have taken my experiences, and what I have done is I now have 14 officers on this team. These 14 officers do everything from motion picture to construction sites, to pharmaceutical manufacturers, to warehousing. So they have other duties over and above just the motion picture. I am the only full-time one. These officers, most of them have been on ride-alongs with me. Again, if anyone out there knows that, they know I bring. And I also I've actually, in the upcoming weeks, I'm doing a number of inspections where I'm bringing some management. Some of you may know Trina Pollard and Kim Stubbs, obviously. They're going to be joining me as well to get more exposure to this industry, see the positive things and the positive gains. Like there has been some significant gains. All regions. We cover everything. We have officers right up north into Prince George, through Terrace, Smithers, through the Okanagan. We obviously cover the whole province. Our bulk of our team obviously is in the Lower Mainland. It's where the bulk of the productions are made. But yeah, there was a production up at Smithers this year or last year that we had 2 officers attend. Our team meets every 3 months, where we discuss our findings on our inspections. We discuss the challenges in the industry and how, as officers, we can assist. Where can we see, where are the gaps that we're seeing? Again, we've identified the union work. We've identified a significant, or not significant, a number of problems that we provide. And it comes down to this question. Goal to develop working relations with producers, production managers, consultants, union representatives, workers, and studios. In the big picture, performing arts, motion picture, you are short duration employers. There's been a few series like Supernatural, but even that's short duration. How can you compare a production that runs 10 months to a manufacturing facility that's been around for 50 years? You come, you go. So we have developed these relationships. I have a lot of people, like it's not uncommon that myself and the other officers will go onto a production and say, "Hey, Joe T, it's good to see you again." So what we're doing is we're trying to coordinate a relationship between an officer and a production. And it's not so much the production, but the people running that production. You have a production manager, and the way the system works is you'll have a production manager, production coordinator. It's the same people, but they move from, like, say, one show to another show. They can go from, not using any names, but Studio A to Studio B. Our expectations, WorkSafe's expectations, is the information you gained dealing with us on production A, you will take to production B. I believe we have a good relationship with all of these people. We had to break down a lot of barriers. But I am not, like I see more producers now joining us on inspections. I see production managers that are not afraid to email me or call me as recently as yesterday. The consultants out there, whether they're with the big studios or with the smaller MOWs, again, are not afraid to call. Our resources are vast. Like, we're talking, if you have a question, ask, we shall find out. The unions, I'm not, the unions aren't afraid to call me. Like I said, I've dealt with most of the union leaders, and I've dealt with most of the union health and safety consultants, and I've done a lot of the business reps. And again, if they have concerns or questions, we will address them. So I think really what I'm trying to say in the last year is we don't really follow the employers. Like, the employers are ultimately responsible for the health and safety of the workers on that production. But the team that we deal with, from the producer down to the production, down to the PA, they're people we're making relationships with. It's become quite interesting to actually go on an inspection now, and I think it's just fabulous when a head of department will come over to me and say, "Paul, look what we've done, what we learned from your last inspection. Look how we've taken these steps to control this." That's the kind of inspections that, we're not there to find problems, people. We're there to look at how you've solved those problems from all the experiences that you had. I just can't stress it enough that our passion is not to find orders and issue fines. We're not out there. We don't have a number to reach. Our role is to ensure workers at the end of the day go home to their families. Simple as that. I see your question, Shelley. We may get that afterwards. So again, last thing I want to quickly talk about is I kind of covered it. We assign officers to the productions. We assign officers to the teams. We try to work with the same people. However, every once in a while, we get what's called an action request, which is basically someone has called us, told us of a very unsafe condition, and we show up. The way it works right now, as long as it's not what we call a high-risk violation, we keep a spreadsheet of all the productions in the Lower Mainland and across BC. And if I'm working with a certain production and an action request will come into Jyoti about a certain hazard on this production, she can look up that production, see, oh, Paul Bergen is already working with this production. And Jyoti will call me and say, how do you want me to deal with this? Do you want me to deal with it, or do you want to take it? 9 times out of 10, I'll say, yeah, send it over. I'll see what's going on. If I happen to be tied up and unable to attend, then I'll ask Jyoti to. That's the only time we can see. And obviously anything after hours or on weekends, we have what we call our standby officers. And so if something happens on a weekend, we can't control who comes out there. In some cases, though, again, if it's depending on what it is, we will get a call from that officer first thing Monday morning saying, Paul, I got called out to such and such a show. They had a serious incident. How would you like to do? How are we going to work together on this? Okay. That's it for our presentation. Anything you want to add, Jyoti, before we go into the Q&A, if there is any?
No, I think you covered it all. Let me see if there's any questions.
Okay. There is one in the chat here, and I'll quickly, can you please comment on it? Sorry, Kim, do you want to read it for me? You're supposed to read? I'll give you.
I'll summarize it. So what is WorkSafeBC doing in regards to claims regarding mental health issues due to work-related concerns, bullying and harassment, sexual harassment, basically issues that impact a worker's ability to perform their work? And then further comment, I believe WorkSafeBC has a very low number of claims approved for these issues, yet mental health issues are a significant concern in the industry.
So first thing I'm going to comment here is we are prevention. We are not claims. Okay. So I can't really speak about the claims process, and I that's for another day. What I can tell you about is the prevention side of it. So let's talk about bullying and harassment. Without using up all our time here, bullying and harassment, we have a dedicated team of officers throughout the province that deal strictly with bullying and harassment and prohibited action complaints. If you are a worker that has experienced bullying and harassment, you have a right to call WorkSafeBC. An action request will be directed to the bullying and harassment team, what we call an information center officer, who will return your call and have that conversation. They will ask you several questions. They will find out what's going on, and they will find out if the employer is meeting their legal obligations. And here's the difference between claims and prevention. Claims adjudicates to whether or not you've suffered an illness or injury at the workplace. Prevention ensures that employers are meeting their legal obligations under the Act and the regulation. And when it comes to bullying and harassment, they have to have policies, procedures, and training in place. And if you have reported bullying and harassment, has the employer followed their own policies and procedures, as well as the requirements under the Workers' Compensation Act, in responding to that complaint? These officers are specially trained. I did bullying and harassment for 4.5 years as one of these officers, and we look at this employer. So if we find the employer did not do or does not have policies and procedures in place, they'll get an order. If we find that the employer has not done a sufficient investigation into the concerns, we will issue an order. So that is it. It's ensuring the employer meets their obligations. Workers have a right to file a claim, and that follows a different process. We do work with claims. They provide us information. But we are the administrators of the regulation and the Act. They are the administrators of the claim process. I hope that answers the question.
Just to add to that, I put a link into our website, which talks about mental health eligibility. And just 2 lines from that to answer that question simply. It has to have happened at work or been caused by work. And then the other thing with the mental health claims being accepted, there needs to be a diagnosis by a psychiatrist or a psychologist. Mm-hmm. So that's some of the reason why the numbers may be low. So an example would be PSTD. But if you want more information, the link is provided in the chat. Also, just to kind of, I did this for a while. I'm just kind of, I'll give you a little scenario where bullying and harassment takes place, but doesn't take place. Okay. You're being disciplined for being late for work. It's done in the privacy of an office. Yes, it's intimidating, it's humiliating, but it might fall under, again, the employer's right to manage their workforce. Mm-hmm. Where the line is crossed is you show up too late, and in the middle of the office in front of all your peers, your employer starts yelling you, calling you names, telling you you're useless. Now we have crossed the line. Mm-hmm. Yes, they have a right to discipline you. No, they can't do it in a situation which is intimidating and humiliating.
which
Yes.
that would be something the officer will be looking at, is how did the employer deal with that problem?
And also reporting. So I'm doing bullying and harassment right now as well. And often what we get is, workers will come directly to us and say they're being bullied and harassed. And then what we ask is, have you reported it? And often it's no, right? So at that point, or they just informally or didn't really use the terms of bullying and harassment. They just don't like what's happening at work. So definitely properly going through the procedures, looking to see if your workplace has the proper procedures in place to do that. But if you completely don't even know how to do it, you sent an email, whatever it is, no one's gotten back to you, then definitely it's something that we can follow up on. And then an order could be issued if it hasn't been investigated.
And even to follow up a bit more with the industry, I have actually reviewed almost all of the anti-harassment violence procedures, policies and procedures of most of the studios and the smaller productions. Again, everything looks good on paper, but I will go, when I do an inspection, and this even, just to get this even a little further, I do ask workers, have you got a bullying and harassment policy that you're aware of? And a lot of them say the same thing, which is interesting. They say, yes. It's up on the wall. There's the 1-800 number.
Yeah.
So at least they're aware that there is a policy and there is a reporting process. Where it would fall back on one of the specialty officers is if the worker felt that the employer did not meet their legal obligations on looking into there. And then the claims process, again, is a separate issue.
And the policy and procedures need to also meet our policies. So they need to have everything included because some will have them, and even their policy will not have the definition with the intimidation and humiliation. So often I've had to write an order because it just didn't meet our requirement, and they've just had to tweak it a little bit to make sure it's up to date, and then make sure that all the workers have been trained and are aware of where to find it, where it is, what to do in case it happens. And I often just say to have a regular discussion about it too, because we have seen definitely over the pandemic an uptick in bullying and harassment questionnaires coming in. So just putting it into the safety meetings, into the agenda, whatever it is, and just having that discussion a little bit more regularly. If anyone is feeling like they're being bullied and harassed, this is what you can do. So, yeah.
And a plug for Actsafe, they just launched an anti-bullying and harassment course for your industry.
Excellent.
Perfect.
Great.
I think that's it for questions, Kim.
Yep, that is. Well,
Sorry.
thank you, everyone.
Yeah, I just wanted to
Yes.
thank everybody. You did an amazing job. I actually learned a lot. And it's true, we do have an anti-bullying and harassment course that you can take online. It is free, so you can just add it to your profile and take it whenever you'd like. So thank you so much, Paul and Jody and Kim as well. A reminder to everyone that this evening's social event is bingo, and that we have an incredible prize, or a bunch of incredible prizes to give away, including a Samsung tablet, AirPods, and an Apple Watch, and a 65-inch Samsung Smart TV. So it looks like it's time for lunch and a stretch break, sponsored by our friends at Stage Fab. But we look forward to seeing you for our next session at 1 p.m.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.